Okay, everybody, welcome to this meeting of the Social Services Scrutiny Committee held today on Tuesday, the 1st of December at 5:30 p.m. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules. I'd like to remind members to keep their microphones on mute and only unmute when making a contribution to the meeting, except myself and the Vice Chair will keep their cameras and microphones on throughout the meeting. If you wish to contribute, click your hands up and I will get you as soon as I possibly can do, and I will invite you to speak. We will be using Microsoft Forms for voting on agenda items number 3, 5 and 7. So after the recommendation has been moved and seconded, a poll will be added into the show conversation bar when we reach that point in the meeting. And members then will be asked to click on show conversation, then click on either yes, no or abstain, and then finally click on submit vote. If you are unable to vote for whatever reason, please indicate this to me via a hands up and I will come to you and ask you to verbally confirm your vote. Okay? The vote will stay open for around 30 seconds. Okay. Just to remind you all, this meeting will be recorded and made available to view via the Council's website, except for discussions involving confidential or exempt items, which I am not aware of any being tonight. Therefore, the images, audio of these individuals speaking will be publicly available to all via the recording on the Council's website at www.caerphilly.gov.uk. Okay, so moving on to the agenda, members. Agenda item number 1 is to receive apologies for absence. Kath?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from, as you said, the Vice Chair, Councillor Bazina. We have apologies from Councillor Thomas, and we also have apologies from Councillor Haas.
Okay, thank you very much. And therefore, as the Vice Chair is unavailable this evening, we need a temporary Vice Chair just in case I lose connectivity, which in this digital age is quite a distinct possibility. So therefore, I'd like to propose Councillor James Vincent as a temporary Vice Chair. If you're happy with that proposal, should I lose connectivity?
Yeah, that's fine. Second that, Chair.
Okay, that's great. So can I have... Okay. Kath, do we want to put a forms up for this, or are we happy just for an indication?
Chair, I'm happy if you just want members to put their hands up on using the hands up function and I can confirm the majority.
Okay, if you can just use the hands up function for that proposal, which is temporary chair, Councillor Vincent James. Okay, that's great. I think that's nearly unanimous. That's great, so that's carried.
Thank you.
And I will get your name correct. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 2, which is declarations of interest. Councillors and officers are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and or prejudicial interests in respect of any item of business on this agenda in accordance with the Local Government Act 2000, the Council's Constitution and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. Are there any declarations of interest? Please indicate by the hands up function and I'll fetch you in. No, that's great. Thank you very much. Then moving on then to agenda item number 3, to approve and sign the minutes of the Social Services Scrutiny Committee held on the 24th of September 2020. So going through for accuracy, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, and finally page 7 and blank page 8. Could I have somebody to move those, please? Thank you. Could I have a seconder?
Second, Chair. Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. And we'll now move to the vote, which should be coming on forms. So please click your show conversation and vote appropriately. Okay, Councillor Skivens.
I think Councillor Skivens will have to do a verbal.
Yeah. Councillor Skivens,
Yeah.
how do you wish to vote in regards to this?
I'll abstain because I wasn't in attendance.
Okay, thank you very much. So that is clearly passed. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4, consideration for any matter referred to this committee in accordance with the call-in procedure. Kath?
None, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 5, Social Services Scrutiny Forward Work Programme, big pages 9 to 24. Kath?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to highlight to members the next meeting of the Social Services Scrutiny Committee is on the 2nd of February 2021. We had 2 items planned for the agenda for that day, the Social Services Budget Monitoring Report month 9 and the Director's Annual Report. We've since been advised that the Director is does not have to produce a report this year because of the COVID-19 situation. So that would be removed. And we also have another meeting on the 16th of March 2021, and that item will be the new respite facility. We've had an approach from an Iron Bevan University Health Board to see if we'd be happy to have a report from them, a presentation from them, sorry, on mental health and learning difficulties and provisions. We haven't got an actual date yet, but it's likely to be February or March. So if members are happy for me to tentatively add that to the work programme, and then we'll firm up the dates going forward.
Okay, thank you for that, Kath. Any questions for Kath in relation to that? Okay, give me a second. I can see there's some hands up, or there were. Okay, Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we all know, the Grange Hospital has recently opened, and I would like to ask the committee, would they please contact the Iron Bevan Health Board and ask if they can give a presentation either in February or March on a number of issues which the public have raised in Caerphilly regarding critical care and minor injuries, because it does seem that people are really getting confused. We all know that the minor injuries unit is now in Ystrad, the Royal Gwent, Ebervale and Abergavenny, but the public seem rather confused. And the second point is on the transport facilities from Caerphilly County Borough, especially areas like Bargood, Aberbargood, over to the Grange in Llanfrecfa. I understand that their contract has not been signed with a provider. And thirdly, Chair, the staffing situation. I've had queries about Councillor Etheridge, will the staff be taken from Ystrad Vow and the Royal Gwent and Neville Hall to the Grange? So there are 3 points here, Mr. Chair: the staffing situation, the transport, and the critical care minor injuries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Etheridge. I'm sure there's probably more questions in relation to that. So if we're happy for that to go forward as an addition to the Forward Work Programme, Kath, can I suggest that you propose a cut-off time, Kath, that people to come to you with questions that they may have to give the health board sufficient time to be able to formulate the responses and build that into a potential report for the scrutiny committee. Kath?
Yes, Chair. I mean, if you like, after the meeting, I can circulate an email to the members with any changes to the work programme, and at the same time ask members if they want to add anything in terms of the request. As you know, it will be a request to the Health Board, and I'd have to contact them and to see about when they could possibly attend a meeting as well.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so we do have to remember we are no longer Health and Social Services Scrutiny, so we cannot compel. We can simply request.
We couldn't compel them in the past, Chair. It was always a request.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you very much for clarification on that, Kath. Okay, Councillor Cushion, and Kevin, can you lower your hand if you finish talking, please? Donna?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Question I've got to ask. I note Kath said that there is no longer a need for the director. Well, for this year, there isn't a need for the director due to the COVID crisis to provide a report. Firstly, is that something that's going to be introduced every year, or will it recommence next year? And secondly, is there any way, this is a personal request, I suppose, on behalf of us, on behalf of myself and the committee, if the director could provide us, even with some sort of small report of what's gone on, so that it gives us a snapshot of how things are and how things will be in the following year.
You mean like a synopsis? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Synopsis. A synopsis. Sorry.
A synopsis. Okay. I guess then, Kath, we need to fetch in Dave Street in regards to that.
Chair.
Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Cushion. No problem summing up. And bear in mind that the director's report that we would have prepared would have been for the previous financial year. It would have been for 2019-20. And I think one of the reasons, well, there were two reasons why CIW removed the requirement. One, I think they acknowledge what everyone is wrapped up in at the moment. But actually, to try and write the report at the moment and not mention coronavirus seems quite bizarre to us, really, and we would have struggled with that. Certainly, if you want us to put a synopsis together, we're outlining very briefly what our sort of priorities have been in the current year and how we see the situation moving forward. That wouldn't be a problem, albeit, as I'm sure you can understand, what the world is going to look like moving forward is going to be quite a challenging piece of work to write, but we can certainly give it a go.
With a large caveat, Dave, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, what are members? Any members got any different views in regards to that?
Hang on, sorry, Linda. Can I just ask Dave then?
Yeah,
is this
go ahead.
something which is going to be continued every year? Then that the director won't need to provide us with the report, or is it just this one off?
I think it's to be fair. I think they've cut us a little bit of slack because of everything that's going on.
That's fine. Thank you.
We'll be back to normal next year.
Lovely, thank you.
And not speaking out of turn, surely, but I know a lot of members do look forward to your director's report, Dave. So therefore, if I think it was going to be a situation where there weren't going to be any requirement to do it on a year-by-year basis, the committee may well be inclined to ask for some sort of alternative anyway. But it's good to hear that this is, and I think it's totally understandable in the current circumstances. So if there's no objections, then if Dave, if you could give consideration to that, then for the next available time slot, I guess, or when you're able to do it, keeping in mind the current workload that you all have in social services at this moment in time. Okay. Councillor Steve Skivens, you got your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just picking up on something that Councillor Etheridge raised there. I do think we need to press an Island Bevan Health Board on the transport issue. This committee has, on several of the previous update reports from an Island Bevan Health Board, raised the issue about transport, not only with the Royal Gwent and the Heath Hospital, but the inception of the new hospital. And we've had previous reassurance that this was a high priority. Yet in 2019, I wrote the stage Stagecoach just as one provider, and they'd had no communication whatsoever with the Health Trust at that time. So I do think it is an issue that we do need to press, because we've been told previously that this was a high consideration.
Well, I think it's a good point, Councillor Skivens. Just to remind all members that Kath has said she will send out an email requesting questions to go forward. So if anybody has any questions in particular to that issue or similar issues that would be covered by the report or the request for the report, then please do contact Kath when she sends out the email to do so. Otherwise, I'm sure we could be discussing it for the next 2 hours otherwise. Okay. Councillor Skivens, anything further? You still got your hand up?
No, that's me done.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Steve, for that. Okay, then, if there's nothing further in regards to that, Kath, is there anything further you wanted to come in on?
No, Chair, it's just a matter of, obviously, because there's changes to the work programme being approved, if members need to take a vote to move and second and take a vote on that.
Okay, so can I have a mover and a seconder, please?
I move, Chair.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Then if everybody can go to their show conversations, a form will be there for individuals to vote upon. Those that don't have the ability to vote using the form, I will call in after the vote is completed. Voting is now open. Okay, Councillor Skivens, how do you wish to vote in regards to this?
I'm for the report.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, that's unanimous. Moving on. Thank you, Kath. To agenda item number 6, to receive and consider the following cabinet reports. Caerphilly Cares, 11th of November 2020. I don't believe any members have asked for this to be brought forward, Kath.
That's correct, Chair. Nobody's not been called forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're moving on then to receive and consider the following scrutiny reports. Agenda item number 7, development of a multi-agency safeguarding hub in Caerphilly, big pages 25 to 30. I believe Gareth is coming forward in regards to that one.
It'd be the cabinet member first, Chair.
Oh, sorry. How could I forget? Cabinet member, would you like to introduce your report?
Thank you very much, Chair. Safeguarding of vulnerable adults and children is a key responsibility of the Social Services Department. For a number of years, regional safeguarding boards for adults and children have had responsibility for developing multi-agency safeguarding practices across Gwent. Tonight's report references a proposal that is felt will further strengthen these arrangements. As stated in the report, Gwent Police commissioned a review of their Public Protection Unit service with a view to making improvements and potentially reconfiguring the way the functions were delivered across the police force area. An independent project manager was commissioned to lead the review, and the final report was presented to the Gwent Police Management Board at the end of August 2020, where it was endorsed in its entirety. Based on multi-agency feedback to the review, police officer decision makers were co-located in both Newport and Blaenau Gwent IAA services. These pilots were evaluated and the key findings reported back as laid out in the report. The key findings have been overwhelmingly positive, and tonight's report requests the Scrutiny Committee note and support the development of a multi-agency safeguarding hub in Caerphilly. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Member. We'll now move over to the officer to present the report.
Good evening, everyone. I didn't intend to go through the report, Chair. I was hoping that we would just pick up questions if that was okay.
Okay, I'm quite happy to do that. Okay, starting off then, we have a question from Councillor Hetheridge.
Hello, Gareth. Thanks for answering a number of my points in writing. I just wanted clarification in regard the the multi-agency approach regarding collaboration of us working together. It was on 5.6 regarding the operation challenges on the Aneurin Bevan Health Board. Now, I know you can't give undertakings for the Health Board, but looking, I see the police approved the multi-agency in August. And do you feel that collaboration at the present time and going forward will be effective?
The very simple answer is yes. I think to have got to the position that we have within Gwent is remarkable testament to the collaboration and the partnership approach that has been adopted across all the partner agencies for safeguarding, and not just safeguarding, but to be fair, across most of the social care and health interface, really. The commitment from health is a bit more difficult, and I for the benefit of other scrutiny members, one of the things that we are aware of is that within the health service, the different divisions have different reporting mechanisms, and so having a physical presence in the safeguarding hub from a health board perspective might well kind of be seen as appropriate, but actually wouldn't be that effective. So the proposal that the health board have put forward is that each key division will have a link person that will be the first point of contact for any information sharing and any information that we require. And we think that that is a really positive step forward and will greatly improve the existing arrangements.
Thank you.
Is that okay, Kevin? Have you got a
Yeah, that's
follow-up?
fine, thanks. No, that's fine,
Okay,
thank you.
great. Oh, great. Thank you, Gareth. Moving on then to Councillor Donna Cushion.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My question goes to point 5.3, where it says the review was identified and developed the following key principles. Can you just answer me, how did you do this identifying? Was it through capacity or was it mapping? So if you could just clarify on how you sort of made this review as identified.
Thank you, Councillor Cushing. I think it's really important to point out and clarify for all members really that this was a police review. This wasn't it wasn't a multi-agency review, even though it was making multi-agency recommendations. And so the review was undertaken by the police. So I don't actually have the detail in response to the questions that you're specifically asking. But the findings of that review were then presented back through the partnership arrangements for all agencies to be aware of, and that's where those principles were identified and agreed across the partnership. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, but it would be good if you could just find out how they did actually identify it. If you could go back to them and just have clarification on that, I would really appreciate.
Certainly, I'll make the inquiries, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cushion. Councillor Anne Gale. Sorry, Anne Gare.
Thank you. I've just got a question on 5.12. It talks about the investment of a dedicated virtual conference facility, and that a second conference facility would be funded out of from the Directorate Fund from reserves. So I wondered, what was what did this actually entail? How much is involved, and why they have to have a second conferencing facility?
The second conferencing facility is in response to what we foresee to be the demand for virtual conferencing going forward, on the basis that it's not just the police that are co-locating to Fox's Lane. We are co-locating the other safeguarding service areas from across the directorate. So adult safeguarding, child safeguarding, the family meeting coordinators, the IROs who will be chairing all of the conferences and child protection reviews. So we recognise that even though the police are investing in one conference facility, it would be really beneficial to get this right from the start. It would be really beneficial for us to invest in the second in order to ensure that we've got the capacity there to carry on in the way that we've currently been working because of COVID. So what this is a real example of is taking the best points from our the way that we've been working during COVID and hanging on to those, because it really is a more efficient use of professionals' time, and we're getting far more engagement from all the partner agencies virtually attending meetings than we would have had we had to have physical meetings or even telephone conference calls. Where we're seeing a much better take up really. So it's about future-proofing the safeguarding hub from the start really, based on the projections that we've made.
Okay, I just wondered what it actually entails, because we're doing, obviously I'm in private industry and we're doing a lot more of this here as well, but we're just using rooms and the PCs and screens. So I just wondered what it actually entails, all this investment.
The biggest cost will be the state-of-the-art equipment. So it's based on around a very large TV screen that will allow all people party to that meeting to be able to be seen. So as with Teams, we've got up to 9 people at a time. Sometimes our meetings can be much larger than that, and it can be quite difficult when you're dealing with safeguarding issues to not be able to see who's present and not be able to gauge the meeting really. So that will give us that facility. More importantly, there are obvious security issues for the police, so those have to be satisfied before they can co-locate. And then kind of subsequent to that, we've got issues in terms of soundproofing those rooms so that we can guarantee that those discussions are completely confidential. So that there are some infrastructure costs in terms of making the building fit for purpose, if you like. And again, very much want to get this right from the start if we possibly can, and so that's what that is linked to.
Okay, that's great. Understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gare. Any further questions in regard to report 7? Councillor Skivens?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I picked up in the report that it says it's a regional approach, but I'm not quite sure how that works right across the South Wales area. Have we got a similar arrangement in other police forces, other areas? Because obviously a lot of the authorities haven't got court terminus administrative areas. All their services, they do use services in other counties, other health board areas. So how do you coordinate all that, particularly with a vulnerable person who may not have a fixed abode or may move between districts?
The two parts to that, I think, Councillor Skivens, in the sense that if I deal with the last part first, there are very well embedded cooperation, collaboration, communication processes in place across the whole of the country, not just Wales, not just the regions within Wales, but across the whole of the UK when there are safeguarding concerns or any protection, child protection or adult protection concerns. So regardless of individuals or families moving around, we are pretty good at identifying where they are and passing the relevant information on. And our main, if the concern is that great, then the police are the obvious means to communicate that in the first instance because of the national network that they are part of. But when we talk about the regional approach to this, we're very much talking about the Gwent region and very much talking about the Gwent Police Force, an Iron Bevan Health Board, and the 5 local authorities within that. Different regions have had slightly different approaches to moving this forward. The South Wales Police, for instance, in some areas developed what they would refer to as a multi-agency safeguarding hub, the MASH, and they do slightly different things in the different areas as well. So some MASHs actually undertake all the investigations and then transfer the work across to social care. Whereas our proposal is that all the decision making will be joint at the front door, but the investigations and any assessments that follow from that will actually be undertaken by our ordinary services, our normal services, for want of a better word, if that makes sense. So there are slightly different models in the different regions, and this proposal is about consistency across the Gwent police force area. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks for that information.
Thank you, Councillor Skivins. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gareth. This proposal's to be applauded and welcome. I was just wondering about this. Is about co-location for the different teams from different organisations, but I was wondering about there's not an intention to kind of look boundaries about professional kind of experience and stuff, so we won't be having kind of generic safeguarding. People that have grown their expertise around child protection and adult protection separately, that will still remain so in each of the professions. Yeah,
absolutely. The arrangement in Caerphilly, as you're well aware, is that we have an IAA service, which is, even though it's one service, is actually split into children's and adults. So all of the child concerns and all of the adult concerns come into IAA, but they're dealt with by dedicated duty officers who are experienced in those particular areas of work. The benefit of having the police co-located is that immediate decision making, immediate sharing of information, and of course from the police protection, public protection point of view, they are all age. It's an all age service, so they deal with child protection and adult protection in one. But then the added benefit for us of co-locating our adult protection staff there is that they will be party to those decisions at the very earliest point of contact. And similarly with our child protection coordinators and the reviewing officers. So it really will be a one-stop shop in terms of decision making and kind of much more effective use of people's time, really, and not having to rely on email, telephone contact and such like.
thank you. That's great.
Does that answer your question, Councillor James?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Okay, great. Okay then.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, Councillor Joe.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
what I'm concerned about is children who've been taken from their parents, and then you're encouraging the parents to take the child back. You know, I'm not really happy about that myself. I don't think it's a good idea to get the children back with their families, but how much influence does the child have on whether they go back to their parents or not? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor June, is this related to report 8?
Oh, perhaps I'm on the wrong report.
Is that the safe reduction in number of children looked after in Caerphilly? Is
Yeah,
that the one?
that's right. Yeah.
Okay, we'll come to that one in a moment, Councillor Gale, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem at all. Okay, Councillor James, you still got your hand raised. Is there something you'd like to come back in on? Okay, no problem at all, no problem. Okay, if there's no further questions then in regards to this, if you just bear with me a moment, members. Okay, the recommendation at 3.1 is for Scrutiny Committee to note and support the development of a multi-agency safeguarding hub in Caerphilly. Please go to your show conversation and the voting will be open. And for any members
Chair, there's
unable to vote,
3.2 as well. There's 3.2 as well. Second recommendation.
oh, my apologies. 3.2, I hadn't scrolled down that far, Kath. 3.2 is also for Scrutiny Committee to agree the broad strategic and operational principles that will inform this development. So that's 3.1 and 3.2. So if you could go to your show conversation, a form will be there for you to vote upon. Anybody unable to vote, please indicate by hands up and I will ask you verbally for your indication of vote. Okay, and Councillor Steve Skivens, how do you wish to vote in regards to this?
I'm for the paper.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I believe that is unanimous and that's carried. Okay.
Chair, that was a majority. One person didn't vote on the poll.
Okay, my apologies. Bear with me, members. I'm having a few IT related issues here. Okay, moving on then to agenda item number 8, the safe reduction of the number of children looked after in Caerphilly, pages 31 to 36, and I'm going to fetch in the Cabinet member to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Members will recall that in October 2019, officers brought forward a report laying out Welsh Government expectations that local authorities across Wales actively work to reduce the number of children looked after. That report explains some of the challenges attached to that agenda and commit to update scrutiny committees on progress. Tonight's report will update Scrutiny Committee on the actions taken to implement Welsh Government's expectation to safely reduce the number of children looked after in Caerphilly. It will also explain some of the challenges that have been experienced and will further explain the current expectations in this area. And I think, Gareth?
Yes, I believe the Assistant Director, Gareth Jenkins, is going to be taking this report forward. Gareth?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Cook. For members that have been part of the committee for some time, you will already be aware of this, and the Welsh Government First Minister's Manifesto pledge to safely reduce the number of children looked after across Wales, not just within our local authority. And as a result, we were expected to develop an action plan and report against that action plan on a quarterly basis in terms of our progress made. So the report came to you in October of last year. So this is a very timely update, really, a year on, to let you know where we're at. And basically, the report is split into two sections. One focuses very much on the performance that we have to report to Welsh Government. So that's the first part of the report. And then the second part of the report relates to the additional funding that was allocated by Welsh Government to assist local authorities to safely reduce looked after numbers through the ICF funding stream. And so the second part of the report, and that, to be fair, that the way that we were planning to spend that money was also reported to Scrutiny separately. So some of that will also be familiar in terms of the 4 key strands of that investment. So the report is broken down into those two parts because they're actually interlinked and form already. Key to this was Caerphilly's position in terms of response to Welsh Government was that we were predicting a continued rise in looked after numbers for 2020, up to 490 being the total, because the ICF funding wouldn't truly come into effect until 2020, 2021. And that was accepted by Welsh Government. On the 1st of April this year, we had 451 children looked after, so we were well below that 490 target. But as the report explains, we have experienced an increase in overall numbers during the COVID months. And so as of today, we've got 470 children looked after across the county. The report, as I say, follows the performance reporting requirements of Welsh Government. So it looks at the breakdown of that 470 number in terms of the different placements, and members at 5.4, you will see that 190 of those children are at what we consider to be appropriately placed at home with their families, which may be the point that Councillor Gale wants to come back to when we get to the questions. So we've got 190 children placed at home, either with parents or with relatives or extended family. So they're placed under care orders. So legally they're looked after, even though they're actually living at home. And then we've got 280 children who are looked after in other forms of care. The second strand of the performance reporting is around the out-of-county placements. And the report very clearly at 5.6 outlines the out-of-county placements that we've got. So we've got 126, and the breakdown, again, is quite important for members to note. So we've got 40 of those children are actually placed with their parents or relatives who live outside of the county, but were in Caerphilly at some point. 24 are placed with Caerphilly approved carers just outside the borders. So we have a number of foster carers who may live in neighbouring authorities who chose to come to Caerphilly to foster. 35 children are placed with the independent sector, and that's a significant reduction over the last 18 months. We were around 68 to 70 children at any time with the independent sector, and that has reduced to 35. And we've got 22 children in residential care. And then for those of you who are mathematicians, we've got 5 left, and those 5 children are either in supported accommodation, so they're over 16, or they are in residential school placements. Okay. 5.7 focuses on out of country, so we've got a report on out of county, but within Wales, and then we've got a report on the out of country, so outside of Wales, and we've got 6 children placed outside of Wales. That figure was 10 earlier in the year, so that's a significant reduction for us as well. 3 of those children are placed with relatives, so we consider to be long-term placements. We wouldn't have any intention of changing that. 2 are placed with the an independent agency in Norfolk, which is where their family originate from. So that's really important in terms of connections. And 1 child is in residential care, and we've got plans to repatriate that child back to Caerphilly just after the Christmas period. And then I don't intend to go through the ICF part of the report in any great detail, but the 4 key strands of the investment in order to support us to safely reduce the looked after numbers were around investment in family meetings to try and avoid or try and support families to avoid that child coming into care, so by finding their own solutions and helping them to help themselves. Additional support for special guardianship carers, so that we make it an equal offer to fostering, so that there's no difference in the services and the support that we would provide. Enhancing our edge of care support, and our members are very familiar with our intensive support team that Caerphilly has invested in for a significant period of time now, way before edge of care services were being developed across Wales. We already had that in place, and mediation support for children facing homelessness. So I don't intend to go through those in any detail, but I'm sure there are probably going to be some questions around that.
Okay, Gareth, thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Before we take questions, I think it would be remiss of me to say, especially into the last element you was discussing about those individual children that have been repatriated, that is no small feat. And I think your department and your staff need to be congratulated, because I happen to know, and a number of us who have worked in social services happen to know the amount of work that has to go around individualized support packages to meet those children's needs, and being able to get them much closer to home is a significant achievement for some of those very complex individuals. I just wanted to say that before we started taking the questions. So first up is Councillor Cushing.
Hi, thanks, Gareth. My questions, oh, sorry, this hands up function. I do apologise. Relate to 5.1 of, is it 5.1? Yeah, 5.1 and 5.2 of the report. Bearing in mind all that you've said regarding children's services and them being guardians, and there are so many that are in foster care, etc. I found it quite significant, the 10%. I know the Welsh Government, First Minister manifesto promise, but I found it quite significant that it was a 10% drop to 49. Bearing in mind, you've said now that that figure is now at 470. But my question is really, is this reduction down to a population decrease, or are you lowering the criteria where a child might have to go into a looked after situation? Because God forbid anything happens to a child, because the criteria has been lowered somewhat. I understand the interventions that you are making with families, but you know, I would have concerns over that. Thanks.
I hope I got the gist of that. I think what I would say to you is I'm very confident that the service that we're running hasn't changed the level of involvement or the threshold for our involvement, despite the pressures of the pandemic. We continue to provide the right support at the right time, in the right place as best we can. And the children that are coming into the care system really do require that support at that time. So I would just want to offer you the reassurance that there's no change in that, really. We are continuing to provide a very safe service, and I'm very confident that we make those decisions in the right and most appropriate circumstances. The numbers, they can be a bit confusing, but we were predicting, based on our previous increases, we were predicting to get to 490 by the end of March 2020, and the reality was that at that point we were only at 451, so we were below the prediction, which was a really positive position to be in. And what we said was that we had to offer up a target to Welsh Government that we would aim to achieve, and 10% is about average given my experience of the other 22 authorities and the responses that they provided. There were a few authorities that you may be aware of who didn't provide any such target at all, but the majority of local authorities that did suggest an aspirational target, then we're not a million miles away from that. So the overall reduction was to get us back down to 441, and so at the moment we're above that, but we've still got until the end of March 22 in order to see what else we can put in place in order to try and achieve that. However, our position, and this is back to my original sentence really, our position is that we're only going to do this where it's safe to do it. And I want the Scrutiny Committee to be reassured that we're not going to make any dangerous decisions. We're not going to take any risks that are not manageable. And the director particularly is very, very clear in letting everyone know that we will do it where it's safe to do. And if we need to accommodate a child, then we absolutely will. Okay.
So basically, the figure then is aspirational for the Welsh Government. So if you don't actually achieve it, then there's not going to be any sort of comeback. If you have to have, say, 445 on your list rather than 441, there's, you're not going to say, right, let's kick kid A out on the street, or kid B, do you see what I mean?
Absolutely.
Or put them back with a dangerous, parent or guardian.
Absolutely not. The director is fully supportive of our position on this. We will never be in a position where we have to make a decision like that, because that is just unacceptable. And we relay that message to Welsh Government. And to be fair, they do understand that position themselves. We can justify why every child is looked after, and providing we can do that, then absolutely we will continue to provide that evidence to Welsh Government.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, Dave Street, Director of Social Services, you wanted to come in on this one?
Yeah, just to support Gareth's comments, Chair. I think when we brought this to you last October, and certainly when we took it to Cabinet after the Scrutiny Committee, I went out of my way to reassure members that a child comes first. The target is very much secondary for the reasons Gareth's alluded to there. We don't want to bring children into the system who don't want to be there. That's not a good thing for them, and it's not a good thing for us. But where a child needs to come into the system, they come into the system. The target doesn't play any part in that decision making at all. And quite frankly, I'd rather front up a Welsh Government discussion saying our numbers have gone up than front a discussion with someone else saying that we haven't looked after a child properly. So it's a no-brainer, quite frankly.
Okay, Dave. I just got a quick question before I fetch in Councillor Etheridge and Councillor June Gale. Gareth, I guess I don't need this assurance, but I'm going to ask this in relation to the first part of Councillor Cushion's question. But can you tell me, has the risk assessment process changed post-COVID?
Absolutely not.
Great.
What has happened, if anything, is that it's had to be strengthened because of the way that we're engaging with families, and we have to take different kinds of risks into account now when we're engaging with those families. So if anything, it has actually been enhanced and strengthened as a result. But in terms of that decision making about the risks to the child, absolutely no change at all. We continue to work. It's business as usual for us.
Okay, thank you very much, Gareth, in regards to that. I'm now going to fetch in Councillor Etheridge and Councillor June Gale after that, and I can see Councillor Anne Gare, and then we'll move on from this particular report. Okay, Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you, Gareth. My first question was going to ask that this is, because not been on the scrutiny committee before, that this new initiative is mandatory. It was compulsory, so I assume it was. But I'm concerned here about the impact on our staff, you know, in Caerphilly, the additional workload, significant pressures on CCB social services staff. And my question's really around a number of issues. The current pressures, the difficulties, obviously the cost of you know, the assembly, because we've got, as you said, 470, and they're looking at a target figure of 441. But I would like to ask, do you feel that the performance targets and measures which the Welsh Government is implementing are reasonable? And have you and David had meetings with the Assembly officials to explain, you know, that you are under pressure? And my concern is, being an ex-civil servant for 37 years, do they really understand? And hopefully they do, because obviously they're dealing with all the authorities in Wales. And sometimes we have a spreadsheet and we say the target is 441 and they're still on 470. So really that is my question. Do you think the performance targets are reasonable, and do the Welsh Government understand? Because the concerns that I've got are for our staff being under additional pressure. Thank you.
Okay, Gareth.
Yeah. I think to reassure Councillor Etheridge, we, through our professional body, so through ADSS, that's the Association of Directors of Social Services, and then the subgroup of the heads of children's services that have got a voice within that as well. We have been in constant dialogue with Welsh Government around the targets. Welsh Government started to change the language then, to be fair, from targets to expectations. So that does shift the emphasis slightly, and I think there is a recognition that particularly during the last 6 months with COVID, there is a recognition that any progress is going to be hampered potentially by the impact of that. In terms of whether the performance measures are realistic, I think they do bring about a consistent approach across Wales, and from that point of view, they make sense for Welsh Government. Do they make a difference to us locally? Not necessarily, because we have far more what we would consider to be much more relevant performance indicators that we would be monitoring and more concerned about in terms of the safety of the service and the effectiveness of the service. I guess in terms of impact on staff, which was the early part of the comment, really, Councillor Etheridge, I think COVID has definitely impacted on staff and staff resilience, and staff are beginning to feel it now after all this time. However, the work that we're doing around children looked after, that hasn't changed. The service continues to be the same, the impact on staff continues to be the same, and that hasn't changed. But what has changed is the way that we're delivering that because of COVID. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you very much. Lyndon, I have to apologise, I got to go at 6:30.
Okay, no problem. Thank you for letting me know, Councillor Etheridge. Okay, you may wish to go then in between the items when we get to the end of this item, if you haven't done so already. Okay then, Councillor June Gale.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And they put outside of where, are they put there for a reason? Is it for a safety issue for the child? And the are the children put outside the county borough? But is it because we haven't got enough foster carers? Are the children that are put back with families, their own family? Is it with the agreement of the child that they go back to the relatives or parents? Thank you, Chair.
That's okay, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. So I'll take those in turn, Councillor Gale. In terms of children that are placed out of Wales, I think the report clarifies, and I did say earlier that we've got children that are actually placed either with relatives or close to their family in different parts of the UK. So for those children, and that's 5 out of the 6, for those children, we think that those placements are very appropriate because they're maintaining the links with the family. Yeah. The one child that is out of Wales in residential care, we have plans to repatriate to Caerphilly after Christmas. Okay. In terms of out-of-county placements within Wales, but outside of Caerphilly, the majority of those we're placing with probably within about 20 miles of Caerphilly, and we're maintaining those children in their schools wherever that's possible to do. So even though we're looking out of county, we're trying to maintain the placements within a reasonable travel distance to ensure that we can maintain links not just with school but also with family. Okay, so I would just offer you that reassurance. Sometimes that is due to a lack of foster placements. You're absolutely right, and you know that we've got an ongoing recruitment campaign, and we're making some inroads there. We're increasing numbers, but it is a constant challenge for us, and we're constantly looking for new carers. So you know, plug that wherever you go, please. Do the hard sell and get people to apply. And then in terms of where children are returned to their parents or returned to family members, whether they're involved in that decision making or not is really determined by their age, yeah, and their ability to engage in that. Wherever a child is able to engage, then their voice will be listened to and will be taken into account as part of that planning. Invariably, and I think everyone will understand this, even where children have had quite a tough time at home, they actually still want to go home. So invariably children will say, yes, I want to live with my family because that's where they belong and they have that sense of belonging. So wherever we can do that and wherever it's safe to do so, then we will do that, and we will listen to the child if they're able to engage because of their age and understanding they're able to engage in those decisions. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gay. Moving on to Councillor Anger, and we'll wrap up this conversation then.
I just wondered, you mentioned that some authorities didn't provide a target, and I wondered if that was because they disagreed with this.
That's a hot political potato, Councillor Gay.
Yeah, I'm gonna come in on this one if I could. I don't think it would be appropriate for the officer to answer that one because there is a line, Councillor Gay, and we wouldn't want the officer to cross that line. So maybe you have another question, Councillor Gay.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay then. Well, if there's no further questions, that's great then. We'll move to the recommendations. So the recommendation 3.1 is for Scrutiny Committee to note the actions taken to implement plans to safely reduce the number of children looked after and to confirm the current position in Caerphilly. So therefore there is no vote on it, so noted. Okay, then moving on to agenda item number 9, which is the Regional Partnership Board's update. Councillor Cook, Cabinet Member, you'll introduce this, please.
Thank you, Chair. At its meeting in February 2020, the Scrutiny Committee received an update report with regard to the work of the Gwent Regional Partnership Board. One of the recommendations made after members had considered the report was for the Social Services Scrutiny Committee to receive further reports on the work and priorities of the board. The work of the board has been significantly affected by the coronavirus pandemic, having not met for several months at the start of the outbreak. Since it's recommenced, the board has done some work on learning the lessons from the initial outbreak, utilisation of ongoing and further grant funding, and preparing services in readiness for the winter period. The report demonstrates that Gwent Regional Partnership continues to be at the fore of the transformation of health and social care services across the region.
Councillor Cook, I believe you muted yourself halfway through that.
Sorry, Chair, I got connection issues. I think can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, just about. If I could just ask though, before you proceed, Councillor Anger, is there an issue? I can see your hand is still raised electronically. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. Okay, back to the cabinet member, Councillor Cook.
How far did you? How far did I get to?
I think you probably got about. I think you got halfway there.
Right. Okay. So as the report demonstrates, the Gwent Regional Partnership continues to be at the fore of the transformation of health and social care services across the region.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Cook.
Okay?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Dave Street. I nearly said Councillor Street then. I wouldn't want to put that on you.
I wouldn't want you to put it on me either, Chair. Thank you. Thank you. As Councillor Cook's alluded to, you're not disfamiliar with the Regional Partnership Board. Indeed, after that meeting on the 4th of February, if I recall, Scrutiny actually wrote to the Minister expressing some concerns around governance, the Regional Partnership Board, and asked for some reassurances around that. I know you had a reply. And this report, as Councillor Cook alluded to, was going to be a quarterly report. However, when we did that, little did we know what was coming down the line. So the reason you haven't had this until the 1st of December is very much of the first few months of the outbreak, the Regional Partnership Board was pretty much put into hiatus. So if I could ask you to look at 5.1 of the report, in the meetings that have taken place since we got back together as a board, there have really been 4 distinct agenda items that have dominated the work of the board. As you can imagine, it's been very much around the coronavirus outbreak and how the Regional Partnership Board and its constituent members have actually responded to that outbreak. There's the Transformation Fund, which we have from Welsh Government. There's still an expectation that we push on with that agenda. That agenda did have an underspend in 2019-20, and so we have been able to sort of redistribute some of that money. And probably most importantly, consideration of the integrated winter plan for 2020-21. The winter plan is always a very big deal for us, particularly in adult services. It's how we cope with the pressures that we normally have this time of year. Because as you can imagine, we're all pretty fearful going into this period of what the winter potentially could bring when we've got the pandemic to deal with, plus the normal challenges that we could have from seasonal flu, inclement weather, etc., etc. So the agenda has been pretty busy dealing with those issues. A little bit like Gareth did on her first report, I'm not going to take you through this paragraph by paragraph. I'll just sort of pull out the distinct elements for you, which I think are of distinct interest. You'll see in paragraph 5.4, again, I referenced the Transformational Fund and some funding that was provided there, very much to sort of integrate social care and health and make sure we had seamless health and social care services. The bullet points under paragraph 5.4 indicate the priorities for that funding. And how we've responded to those. And the paragraph 5.6, you'll see that Welsh Government have now indicated that the Transformation Fund funding will now continue until March 2022. That's really important for us because initially it was going to end in March 2021. But as you could imagine, with us being sort of sideswiped by the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to undertake lots of activity that has deflected us from those agendas. And so we've been given a little more time to deliver what we need to deliver against that significant transformation agenda. Paragraph 5.10, you can see that we've had an additional 10 million allocated to the Regional Partnership Board. That money came across on the 24th of January 2020. Again, very much around responding to the winter planning pressures that we're going to face. the decision of the board there was basically that would be split 50-50 between health and local authorities. So an Iron Bevan had half of it, local government had the other half, which we apportioned amongst the 5 authorities. But that winter plan, I really can't overemphasize how important it is, particularly moving into the current year. 5.12, we've identified the purpose of the plan, and that plan being structured around 6 goals and 4 harms that had been identified by Welsh Government in their National Winter Protection Plan, and they are laid out there in appropriate detail. So in closing, Chair, whilst there may have been a pause in the activity of the Regional Partnership Board at the start of the pandemic, hopefully what you'll see from the report is that the RPB continues to be at the fore of the Welsh Government agenda around transforming health and social care. And certainly the funding that we've had for the winter plan is very welcome in helping us deal with a series of events that are likely to be very trying and very taxing for us over the next few months. And as previously indicated, we will bring in further reports to you as the work of the RPB continues.
Okay, thank you there, Dave, in regards to that. It would be remiss before I go to the questions in regards to this, for, as Dave alluded to, as a committee, we have cited significant concerns with the governance in regards to these partnership boards, and we are not talking small change here. You know, £10 million being spent with no pre-scrutiny of how that money is actually going to be allocated or spent. I find it quite astonishing, you know, even when they're saying like a 50-50 split, and I'm not going to put the officer in a position of asking a question in regards to this, but it certainly doesn't seem scientific. We'll just split it down the middle and then we'll split it the rest of the ways with the local authority, when we know the significant aspects of the winter planning and how that disproportionately, in my opinion, falls upon social services, and to suggest therefore the money's just split 50-50 certainly doesn't seem like a scientific approach. But as I said, I'm not going to put the officer in the situation of having to answer that one. Okay, I'll move on to Councillor Anne Gare, and then we have the co-opted member, Michelle Walter.
Hey, thank you. So Dave has already alluded to my original question was going to be on why the delay and the temporarily putting on hold of the programme at the start of the pandemic, when I thought that this would be a critical time for it.
Yeah, and I understand that query is a very good query. I think in reality, Councillor Gay, it was staff simply didn't have time to spend 3 or 4 hours sitting in a meeting. The relationships that we had across the board, the relationships between health and social care, and those relationships with our other authorities in Gwent put us in a very good place to deal with the challenges that we had from a pandemic. But quite frankly, even now, it probably feels quite surreal that time in March or April, the possibility of getting, you know, to put it into context, the Regional Partnership Board is normally made up of around 35 people. So, you know, for those many people from health and social care environment to take 4 or 5 hours out of their day to go to an RPB simply wasn't going to happen. That doesn't mean there wasn't joint working. There was joint working on a daily basis.
Okay, do you want to come back, Councillor Gare, or is that okay?
It's fine, thank you very much.
Okay, no problem. Michelle?
Hi there. I just wanted to ask a question. It's really regarding it was about 37 million has come out across Gwent through ICF, as was stated in the report. And I'm just wondering what's going to happen when it stops, you know, with the wonderful initiatives. And I have to say, you know, in the third sector, I've also been part of projects that have received ICF funding. So, you know, but it's the sustainability that's worrying me, and how are we going to continue to manage and support the good work that's already happened?
I think it's the sustainability that's worrying all of us, to be perfectly frank. I think one of the things you'll see I've alluded to in the report is the work that we've started to actually formally evaluate some of the schemes that have been used via the Transformation Fund and the Integrated Care Fund. I think clearly where those projects perhaps haven't come up with what we envisaged, they will cease. Where those projects have been particularly valuable, then we're going to have to make lots of representation to Welsh Government for the funding of those. I think at the start of the regional partnership boards, which is many years ago now, I think there probably was an expectation from Welsh Government that if you would come up with a model of care which was suitably innovative and had new outcomes and new benefits, then what you would do is basically you would stop your old model of care and simply start this new model of care. It doesn't quite work like that, because there's always a period of transition where you've got to run both parts side by side and they both have to be funded. And I think what has shocked people is the sheer scale of the change here. It is immense. So, we'll continue to make representations to Welsh Government. If those representations are unsuccessful, then we'll have two choices. Either we'll have to use existing funding at the expense of whatever we spend our money on at the moment, or we'll have to cease the initiative. That'll be the hard decision that'll be needed.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. I just felt I needed to say something. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, Councillor Skivens, you've indicated you wish to come in on this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I guess it's progress that we're getting a report now from this regional board, but I can't see that it's particularly moved on our original issues and queries, and without trying to be over cynical, the pandemic may have actually exposed some of our concerns. The statutory duty and the statutory officers couldn't stop and have had to continue, whereas the regional board ceased for a while. I guess the funding is fantastic, but I'm still uncomfortable with the relationship, our relationship, the officers' relationship, and the regional board. I still don't get it, to be honest.
And I understand that, and I mean, despite the letter and the response you received from the minister in terms of the way the board operates, quite frankly, nothing has changed. I think part of the problem we have is the grant funding that we're almost exclusively grant funded as a regional partnership board, and the timelines that we work to are quite bizarre. I think there was a reference I made a little earlier. The amount of funding that we had in terms of the winter plan was agreed very late on in the year. We had to move on that very, very quickly. So what happens is the way that the regional partnership boards have been set up by Welsh Government have never been created to facilitate scrutiny by local authority scrutiny committees, and indeed not even by local authority cabinets, in the sense that now, there are noises in the system around that. You've written your letter. I know certainly in other parts of Wales, there have been concerns expressed in terms of the way the RPBs work and operate, and their relationship back to what are statutory bodies in local authorities and health boards. But until something fundamentally changes in terms of the guidance that comes out from Welsh Government, I suspect this is going to be a conversation that we'll be having relatively regularly, to be honest. We're absolutely committed to bringing you quarterly reports. I don't necessarily agree with your comments around the pandemic, perhaps, highlighting the sort of frailties of the RPB. As I said, that was simply about RPB members being extremely busy with some pretty urgent tasks at the time.
Just to come back in on it, we've mentioned it before, and the unfortunate part is that, when we do get a situation, the responsible person will be the responsible person, and this may end up with precedent being set, but by legal proceedings, and I think some of them people on our board will be running for cover.
No, I don't think so. I think the board is a legislative board. It is set up as Part 9 of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. Its responsibilities, its membership are all laid out in that act. So, I don't think it's a question of running for cover. I think it's playing to a different set of rules to those rules that we are normally used to working in local government. It's certainly not something I've ever come across before in my career.
Okay, before I fetch, thank you, Councillor Skivens, and I think it's, if I can just make a comment before I fetch Councillor Walter Williams in, I think it's safe to say it's correct, as Dave has put it. The board, whether we like it or not, and I have my own views, and the committee have made their views quite clear by writing to the minister, is operating within the legislation as it currently is. That's why we have requested that the legislation be looked at and potentially changed if need be, which Welsh Government have given an indication they are looking at this. Now, you know, whilst it is an irk, shall we say, for us as a committee that we are post scrutinising elements, I think we do have to give a little bit of latitude to the fact that we're in unprecedented times and people are going to be pulled for different duties. It doesn't mean that we take our foot off the pedal in regards to applying the pressure to get the legislation re-looked at and proper, robust scrutiny instigated in regards to this board. But we do need to realise that this is obviously going to take a little bit longer than we would have liked. Councillor Walter Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, Dave.
Evening.
Question for 5.8. You say one of the difficulties with the transformation funding continues to be recruitment of specialist posts, with staff reluctant to leave existing posts for a short-term funding post. How do you propose to get around that then, if people won't move?
I mean, there's no magic solution to that. I mean, it is one of the downsides of fixed-term grant funding. You're effectively putting a job out for 6 months, a year, 18 months. Obviously, the longer that period, the more attractive it becomes for someone. But quite often we get in funding agreed quite late in the day for relatively short periods of time, a year or slightly later than a year. And people have got to make a decision. They have to make a personal decision. Are they prepared to leave the role they've got to go into that new role? Now, most organisations, certainly we would, the health board would, other authorities would say to someone, well, if you want to go and try that, it's not a problem. We'll keep your post here. So when that funding ceases, you can come back to your substantive post. But not everyone wants to do that. In a perfect world, it's you know, what you want is permanent revenue funding that you can give someone a permanent employment contract. We don't have permanent revenue funding in a regional partnership board. It's all grant funding. And so, you know, it's just something we've got to try and work through and work around. We do all we can to try and persuade people of the merits. It's a good thing to have on your sort of application forms, your CVs, you know, to enhance the experience you've gained, but fundamentally people make decisions for different reasons.
Yeah, I can understand where if you're moving people out of departments, might be short term, that department then is going to be working one less.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not perfect, as we know.
Perfect, no.
As we know, across health and social care, there's a deficit of key roles. There are some occupations where we all struggle to recruit. So when these new initiatives come up, which water down the staffing pool even further, it can be very challenging.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, on that question, if I could ask Dave, are they not using the secondment process, or is it the fact that the secondment times are too short? Or because I'm a bit confused, because in my day, so to speak, if you was going for a short-term post, your substantive post would be protected. So is it just that?
No, that still happens, Chair. That happens all the time. But people will still have a view in their own mind around, you know, is it worth me going for 10 months? Is it worth me going for a year? If it was 2 years, then it probably is worth going for. People do go for these roles. It comes down to very much individual choice.
Okay, so it's not that we're putting undue barriers in
just not enough people
in place. Okay, okay. So are we then going to be thinking of, I don't know, some new invitive way of trying to get these individuals in other than the normal method, or?
Well, I mean, again, even that is challenging, isn't it? In a sense of when you're dealing with grant funding, you are where you are to a degree. I think what is going on around health and social care is significant recruitment campaigns, not just attached to the regional partnership board work, but in if you like, into our mainstream work, because there is a dearth of social workers in some areas. We know the problem health boards have with things like registered nurses. There are people like occupational therapists. There's an awful lot of demand out there, and at the moment supply isn't meeting that demand. So the trick, quite frankly, is in the sort of training, the career progression, those initiatives that we can make, that when people leave college or university, they choose to come and work in health and social care as opposed to any other area they can go and work.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Dave. Okay, if there's no further questions in regards to this report, I take members to 3.1 recommendations. Members to note the content of this report, and so noted. Okay. Moving members on to agenda item number 10, Social Services response to the coronavirus pandemic. This will be Councillor Cook, Cabinet Member. I'd just like to remind members that when we requested this report, this is on a broad basis, and there will be a recommendation put to this report that members will identify via the next meeting areas they wish to drill down into for further reports, as this is a broad-based one, and that you are to coordinate with myself and committee services, and if this is passed, then for further reports to come forward in due course when available slots apply. Okay, Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to leave my camera off because my connection's not great, okay?
Okay.
So members will be acutely aware that the emergence of coronavirus pandemic at the beginning of 2020 has made unprecedented demands on public services and required members, officers, and the people who rely on our services to accept the delivery of services in a different way to the manner they would normally be delivered. This report outlines the principal challenges faced and explains how the Directorate has responded to these challenges. Clearly, the Directorate has not responded to the virus in isolation, and many of our actions have been as part of the Council's overarching response to the pandemic. To that end, I would remind members that this report should be read in conjunction with the report submitted to the meeting of Council on the 10th of September 2020. And I believe the Director of Social Services will go through the report. Thanks, Chair.
Tiff Street.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just checking cameras and mics are on. They are. That's good. Yeah, as Councillor Cook's alluded to, it is important that you read this report in the context of the overarching council report. This wasn't something we did in isolation. It wasn't part of very much a local authority response to the pandemic. And it seems quite bizarre to sit here on the 1st of December talking about it, because obviously this isn't something that was in the past. It's something we're continuing to deal with. But I think those early days of the pandemic are something that none of us had ever gone through before, and took us a little while to get to grips with. As you can see in the report, our fundamental purpose through all of this has been trying to sustain the services to really the most vulnerable people that we've got in our communities. And that has brought challenges that we've never quite come across before. In order to facilitate some of that, we made some decisions very early on. We closed all of our day centres. There was a number of reasons for that. Firstly, the majority of people who were in those day centres fell into the shielding category, so wouldn't be able to attend anyway. But secondly, quite frankly, we needed to take the staff from those day centres to supplement the staffing levels that we had in our older people's homes, because we were starting to lose staff to people who were ill, were isolating, or indeed were on the shielding list themselves. So that was our initial approach. Worked very, very well. We did see some reduction in the requirement for domiciliary care. Unfortunately, a lot of people were furloughed or made redundant at the start of the pandemic, and those people suddenly became available to look after their loved ones themselves, and so didn't need the reliance on us that they normally had. So that did give us a little bit of slack in the system, which we were very, very grateful for. The issue around care homes across the UK is it's been very well publicised in the media. In Caerphilly, we own and run 6 of our own care homes for older people, and we commission services from a further 21 homes. They weren't without their challenges. They did have a significant degree of outbreak, particularly first time round. But actually at the start of the pandemic, getting accurate and consistent information around levels of outbreaks was really quite challenging for us to do. As far as our social work and services and our assessment and care management services were concerned, they had to respond in a very different way. Gareth has alluded to some of that already this evening. The priorities for home visits to families of individuals by social workers centred very much around safeguarding investigations, so we had to prioritise that work. We did adopt the triage report so we could actually make sure that where we did need to visit or social workers needed to visit, people weren't self-isolating, or if they were following public health advice. All attendances are caught by staff were virtual, using either telephones or video conferencing. And throughout that, the great credit of staff, they supported a number of extremely challenging children and individuals, and were able to prevent a fair number of placement breakdowns. Where breakdowns did occur, we did have a situation where there was a dearth of foster placements, particularly independent sector foster placements, which meant we had to rely on residential care, perhaps more than we normally would, and more than we would normally like, but that was the case that we found ourselves in. Again, something else that you would have seen in the media almost on a daily basis at the start was the supply of personal protective equipment. Again, we weren't spared that, even though we were getting regular deliveries of PPE from Welsh Government to the regional store, which operates on a pan-Gwent basis. That was a very fraught process early on in the outbreak. And at the height of that first wave, we were only really holding adequate supplies about for the next 48 hours. And it was, again, great credit to people like Jo and her staff and colleagues in procurement. They were able to source an awful lot of PPE at a local level, which really complemented and supplemented the deliveries that we were already getting from Welsh Government. What was pleasing to note is the PPE position has continued to improve, and really as we move into the winter months, or we're in them now, the position that we have in terms of PPE is much stronger than it was at the start of the pandemic. Testing is another area which has caused us a fair bit of angst at the start. It seems remarkable to see now where we seem to have got testing facilities quite extensively across Gwent. At the start of the pandemic, there were only 2 testing facilities, one at the Cardiff City Stadium, the other at Rodney Parade, Newport, and we were limited to 15 places a day. So as you can imagine, that was a pretty tense situation to be in, but one that has improved, no end in the past few months. Welsh Government did change some of the rules. Care homes, residents in care homes were tested weekly over a 4-week period, and the testing of staff in care homes continues to be occur where positive cases are determined. One of the issues that we had and continue to have to a good degree with testing is the turnaround time for test results. It's not that we don't get results timely, it's the fact that the position can be inconsistent. Whereas we get some results within 24 hours, others can take the best part of a week to arrive. That isn't ideal, albeit it has improved markedly over the past few months. I think on a positive footing, which seems a rather strange thing to say when you've been through and continue to go through what we're going through, there's little doubt that the COVID-19 outbreak has made the general public much more appreciative of the work of our carers in social care and of our staff across local government. And if I could, Chair, I'd just like take my opportunity to put on record my thanks to all the frontline staff, their managers, their supervisors, who have and continue to pull out the stops to ensure that we have been able to continue to provide those services to the most vulnerable people in our community. And everyone has stepped up to the plate. I've mentioned a little earlier the work our procurement staff have done. Mike Jones and his staff were able to turn around the £500 recognition payment, which meant that in Caerphilly, all of the staff who were eligible in both the local authority and the independent sector received that money in October 2020. Financially, it's been a significant challenge to us. You'll know from Mike's report in the previous scrutiny that there were monies made there and continue to be monies made available by Welsh Government. And we are reclaiming that money back. But to give you some examples of where we've had to incur expenditure, in terms of that PPE, where we were able to buy it locally, that cost us around £750,000. We've been able to provide some financial support for the private sector care providers to the tune around £4.4 million. That's to cover things like void beds, uplifting costs that they've faced. And without that funding, I've got no doubt that many of them would have actually stopped operating. Our in-house services, we've had to supplement to the tune of around £660,000 to make sure that they were fit for purpose in terms of staffing, in terms of travel costs, etc. And things like where we've closed our day centres, we've been able to provide support for people in their own homes and their own communities, and that has cost us somewhere in a region of £830,000. As I said, through Mike and his staff's efforts, we are reclaiming that money back from Welsh Government. But without taking those steps in the early days, we would have found ourselves in a much, much darker place than we find ourselves at the moment. Having said that, what I would say is, whereas perhaps this report is very much a report that looks backwards over our performance since the outbreak in March, let's not lose where we are today. We are very much still in the centre of wave 2 in this outbreak, and many of the challenges we had since March are continuing to vex us today. I think the situation on some of those things, PPE, testing results, and one or two other things have improved. That doesn't mean they're not without their challenges, they are. And hopefully in the not too many months, we'll be bringing you further reports in terms of how vaccinations have brought this awful pandemic to an end. And I look forward to bringing a report which is almost a final report in terms of coronavirus. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dave, for that. And I think it's very appropriate now for us to thank as well every single staff member that has worked through this ongoing issue and continues to do so and go above and beyond in these exceptional times. And I'd like it put down for the record, if I please, Kath, that our thanks to all those staff at all grades, and thanks to Dave himself and all your staff, Dave, because it's immense. What we've got is unprecedented, as we know, and no doubt there will be further reports called for in due course where there will be lessons learned. But thank you very much for the report to date, which gives us a snapshot of where we're at the moment. As you said, though, this is a continuing situation and a desperate situation for some families and individuals out there, and we do recognise that. Okay, so moving over, Michelle, you wanted to ask a question in relation to domiciliary care, I believe.
I did, yes, and if it's possible, I did manage to speak to Cyril Luke just before the meeting started. He gave his apologies, but he asked, could I ask a question on his behalf as well?
Yes, so, by all means.
It's all right if I do that. So yeah. First off, what I wanted to know really was, what has the impact been on domiciliary care services across the borough? Because I know, when you mentioned day centres closing and being able to offer care and support in the home, has that had a massive impact on the services that you currently have in the borough?
I don't think it's had a massive impact. As I mentioned earlier, certainly in the early stages, we saw a reduction in demand because families were caring for their own, particularly elderly relatives. As I said, a number of them unfortunately weren't in work. And I think certainly in the early stages, there was a little nervousness around carers going into people's homes when people didn't know whether they were carrying the virus or not. I think that level of confidence came back very quickly, and we found ourselves in a position of providing our normal level of service in no time at all. I think in terms of where we sit at the moment, demand is still significant for those services. We haven't seen that reduction in terms of a second wave. I suppose I'm aware that Jo is on a call and she's had a pretty easy ride tonight, so we'll bring her in a second. But I mean, one of the things we are seeing at the moment is, relatively significant numbers of staff self-isolating, either because they've tested positive or because family members have tested positive. And as a consequence of that, we are continually having to cover vacancies and shifts, perhaps at a rate that we're not used to doing at this time of year. But Jo, I'm not sure if you want to come in and add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. In relation to the domiciliary care, we're actually commissioning now 11% more than we were at the beginning of the pandemic. We have seen a significant increase, more about trying to keep people at home rather than either be admitted to hospital or into long-term care. And as Dave said, what we've experienced, we were quite fortunate in-house. In wave 1, we had very little impact with staff. In wave 2, we seem to be having a bigger impact, and we're working together with all providers. So in wave 1, where they had issues and couldn't cover all their calls, all the providers worked together to ensure that could be done and maintain the service. So it's been, in one way, another positive that, as Dave's alluded to, is actually our relationship with providers now is quite different. It's much more, you feel like we're all much more trusting and doing the right thing for people.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Can I ask you Cyril's question now?
By all means, go ahead.
What he asked was, did you have a time frame for reopening your day centres, or was there a possibility that you may be considering not reopening them because of the way that you've managed to cope with them not being open at present?
I can answer that. There's no plans to open them at the present time, and we don't have a time frame attached to that. I think that will depend on how significant the pandemic is and for how long that continues. We have been able to provide services on a community basis, and there's no doubt a number of people have come back to us and told us that they found that a very positive experience. Would we ever get to a point where we closed all our day centres? Absolutely not. That doesn't mean that we won't necessarily get to a point where we have to review what we've learned from this outbreak and look whether we want to do things differently. What I can reassure you is in the event that we do go down that road or choose to go down that road, it will be subject to full scrutiny and members' consideration before we do anything. But it would be remiss of us just to cast aside what we've learned over the last 8 months. But having said that, there will always be, we know there will always be a cohort of the people who use our services that will need day centres.
I understand. I think it was the feedback that Cyril's been getting around the positive experiences that are happening, and I think he was urging me to see if to just check in that you guys were picking up that as well, that there was a very positive approach. So thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, again, sorry, Chair, I'm not trying to chair the meeting, Chair, but again, Jo,
go ahead, Dave.
That all of that positive experience is what Jo has shared with me, so she may be in a slightly better position to comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is really important. I think we've had some fantastic feedback from individuals and from their families, and some of those people were quite reticent at the beginning, but actually the difference it's made to individuals and some of the other projects that we'll be able to progress. So we've used money from reserves to invest in polytunnels and things, so there will be more outdoor type activities for people, because what we learned was if we had reopened, we'd have had to close again very quickly. And this is about sustainability, and actually the feedback also from some of our staff has been really positive for things that they've never done.
Yeah.
So yeah, what we know is the feedback from people is that they definitely want this to continue. So as Dave said, it's going to have to be a mixed approach, really.
That's great. I think that's where Cyril was coming from as well. So thank you very much for that. I can feed that back to him. Thank you.
So if I can just come in on that question, then Dave and Joe. So are you suggesting at some point, I'm going to put you on the spot here, at some point that there's going to be a review? It would seem appropriate from what you're actually saying. You know, we know we've always had a bit of a mixed bag of provision of service anyway, but it would seem that if it's maybe shifted, that there would be a potential review coming forward and a report in due course, I guess.
Yeah, I think, you know, like I said, you know, clearly at the moment we have to focus on dealing with the day-to-day challenges that we have in terms of maintaining service delivery. But it would be wrong of us not to try and learn lessons from this experience as well. And as I said a little earlier, it does feel a little odd to say, but there have been positive experiences as well as, you know, and dwarfed by the negative experiences. I would accept that. But I think we've almost got a duty to try and learn from those positive experiences and say, okay, what does that tell us in terms of our services from whether it's 2021 onwards? But, you know, we would certainly bring any thinking, proposals, options via this committee.
I think that's positive. I think that's positive to you, Dave, because it falls in line with what we're saying in regards to this report, that this report is a starter for 10, for want of a better word. You know, it's going to lead to a request for further reports in due course when appropriate. That allows us to examine our responses and how we've adapted our services. And there will be lessons to learn, things that we didn't do as well as we could have, and certainly things that we have found that have worked remarkably well that we can replicate potentially going forward. Sorry, Joe, did I cut you off? Did you want to come in there?
No, I was just going to say that's in our sort of work plan for the new year. We want to start looking at it so that potentially as well there might have to be some changes to the charging policy, because currently everything is day-based, not community-based. So we know we want to bring something forward on that. So it would seem appropriate to wrap it up as a whole review in terms of the lessons learned then and how we would want to go forward to get members' views on that.
Interesting, because it's fallen in line with some of the suggestions that we've made. Okay, Councillor Skivens, you're indicating you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on a couple of things you said, Chair, but I addressed this personally to Dave and Joe this evening. It's not about me, but I've been involved with the planning and operations for the Millennium Bug, swine flu, foot and mouth, major flooding, civil disasters and terrorist incidents. I'd like to say nothing like COVID-19. Nearly every bit of your jigsaw has moved. And, you know, yes, I think we do need to do some form of structured debrief at each different stages, because there will be lessons to learn. But, you know, the decisions that you've made and the way that you've kept services running, I think is absolutely exemplary. And I take my hat off to you. And please pass that on to all concerned.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to? Is there anything further you wanted to come in, Steve? You've got your hand still up on that one. Councillor Skivens?
No, I'm done.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that and move on.
If you could take your hand down then, please. Okay, that's great. Is there any further questions in regard to these this broad-based report? Okay, if there's no further questions, there was a proposal put forward that there would be a further recommendation. So it would be a 3.2 that further reports at an appropriate time would be brought forward in relation to substantive areas in regards to this broad-based report. And that would form recommendation 3.2. So we'll just give a moment or two for the Officer Sharon to actually get the form up, because we will need a seconder for that. if there is a seconder.
Second that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay,
Oh.
so if we just wait a moment then, and if we go to show conversation, there will be a vote in regards to that. So we are voting on 3.1, where members are asked to note the director's response to the emergence of the coronavirus in early 2020 and to note the ongoing challenges and pressures that are likely to be with us for some time. And the additional item of 3.2, which would be further reports in due course in relation to specific areas of this broad-based report. Voting is now open, members. Okay, Councillor Skivins, how would you like to vote in regards to this?
Yeah, I'm for the proposal.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I believe there is a majority.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much in regards to that report. Before I officially end the meeting tonight, because that concludes our business, I would like to, in this very weird times, wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Yes, can you believe it? It's only a couple of weeks away now, members, to actually Christmas time, and a very well-deserved break for all our officers and committee members. There have been absolutely outstanding in the work that they have done and at helping us to adapt to a different environment to allow these meetings to continue to take place. As I mentioned earlier, Dave, please ensure, and I'm going to ask committee services as well, when this situation is a bit more behind us, hopefully, we need to find a way of thanking our staff, other than the monetary, for them to know that their work has been duly noted in these exceptional times. And I think it's important that we find a way of doing that. Okay, so Merry Christmas, everybody, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chair.
Good evening.
Thank you, Chair. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry
Bye.
Christmas.
And everyone.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Nadolig Clywed.